Cyberpunk is a subgenre of science fiction that usually features a dystopian future where high-tech and capitalism dehumanizes the individual. They are often anti-hero stories. The cyber in Cyberpunk often deals with body modifications and cybernetic implants that blur the line between human and machine. And the punk in Cyberpunk often refers to the real gritty and hyper-realistic ambience or atmosphere, which is derived from the punk rock movement in the late 70s and 80s. And I want to talk about it because I am Daisy Ex Machina, the drag queen detective who investigates all things speculative in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I've done videos on diesel punk and solar punk, but I haven't done one on the mother of all the punks, cyberpunk, and I think it's about darn time. The term cyberpunk comes from a short story by Bruce Bethke, published in 1983 in Amazing Stories. Editors of speculative magazines really liked that word and began using it in editorials to describe a certain type of science fiction, but it wasn't until William Gibson's Neuromancer was published in 1984 that cyberpunk really entered the mainstream consciousness of the science fiction community. Now, while Gibson is almost indisputably the father of cyberpunk, the subgenre has a lot of grandparents. Many earlier authors and works have been recognized as either cyberpunk or proto-cyberpunk. Some of the works of Philip K. Dick is often labeled as cyberpunk, notably Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which was adapted into a movie titled Blade Runner. Maybe you've heard of it. The Girl Who Was Plugged In by James Tiptree Jr. won the Hugo in 1974 as Best Novella, and Stanislaw Lem, the Polish science fiction author, explored altered reality by way of the Futurological Congress in 1971. Now, why bring up altered reality, or dare I say, virtual reality? Because virtual reality was featured in William Gibson's fantastic Neuromancer trilogy, which includes Neuromancer, Count Zero, and my favorite, Mona Lisa Overdrive. Gibson built a world where people can jack in and live in virtual reality, which is global cyberspace that connects information globally and where AI intelligences arise. And these were written in the 80s, by the way. After Gibson, Bruce Sterling was a big name in cyberpunk. He wrote Islands in the Net in 1988. Then, just as cyberpunk as a genre was waning, at least in science fiction literature, a writer named Neil Stevenson wrote a little novel called Snow Crash, published in 1992. Now, Wikipedia claims that Snow Crash was a satire of cyberpunk. Was it? Was it? Now, admittedly, the name of the main character was Hiro Protagonist, Hiro being the Japanese name spelled H-I-R-O. So there was humor in this novel, which wasn't really much in cyberpunk before it, but it was a great novel. And at least I knew a lot of people in the Bay Area who worked in tech who really loved it. I mean, they really loved Snow Crash. And for good reason. It's a good book that also introduces a new term, the metaverse. Cyberpunk isn't as popular today as it was in its heyday of the 80s, but you still see the occasional breakout like Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. There is one series that doesn't get enough love in my opinion, and that's the Otherland series written by Tad Williams between 1996 and 2001. This is the first book, City of Golden Shadow, and this is the last book, Sea of Silver Light. And there's two more books. It makes up a quartet, and yes, they are all this long. Williams is known for his epic fantasy, and while the Otherland novels are absolutely science fiction, they are really long. Like, epically long. The type of huge novels that is common in epic fantasy, but not so much in cyberpunk, but boy, they are good. I just wonder if the reason why it didn't catch on as much is because people who liked Williams' epic fantasy weren't really interested in cyberpunk, and those who were interested in cyberpunk weren't used to this type of huge novel in that genre. Anyway, The Otherland is fantastic. It's a virtual reality where the rich and powerful and corrupt download their consciousnesses to live forever in virtual reality, and they can continue to have a tight grip on controlling the world. If you are ever in the mood for an epic story, I highly recommend this 4-book series, which I think is cyberpunk, but it also has elements of fantasy as well. Now, cyberpunk as a movie genre has been interesting. Now, of course, everyone will point to Blade Runner, which certainly has the atmosphere and noir style that is often associated with cyberpunk, but there's no virtual reality or cyberspace. For that, I think we can turn to Johnny Mnemonic, starring Keanu Reeves, released in 1995 and based on a William Gibson short story. It bombed in the box office. It only has an 18% on Rotten Tomatoes, but I kind of liked the movie. Did you see it? Let me know what you thought down in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Now, the first blockbuster cyberpunk movie also starred Keanu Reeves, but didn't come out until 1999, and that was The Matrix. The Matrix is, of course, the mind-bending and groundbreaking movie by the Wachowskis. Now, cyberpunk has been on TV. Heck, William Gibson wrote some X-Files episodes, and recently Black Mirror has some really dark and good cyberpunk stories. But way back in 1993, there was a wacky ABC miniseries called Wild Palms. It has a great cast, including Angie Dickinson, if you know her, you know her, James Belushi, Kim Cattrall, Bebe Neuwirth. William Gibson himself makes a cameo in the series.
Harry, this is William Gibson.
Sure, neuromancer.
He coined the word cyberspace.
And they won't let me forget it.
The miniseries is surreal and dark and almost has this David Lynch Twin Peaks type quality to it. If you could find it somewhere, Wild Palms is a must-see. Now, where cyberpunk truly has thrived is in the world of video games and anime. In video games, Megami Tensei started in 1987 and is still going strong. There's a Deus Ex series. And what about the Mega Man Battle Network? In anime, Akira is, of course, the anime that will blow you away, which is an adaptation of a manga series. Ghost in the Shell is another excellent anime. Japan has really embraced the cyberpunk movement. William Gibson frequently visited Japan and said, modern Japan simply was cyberpunk. The Japanese themselves knew it and delighted in it. I remember my first glimpse of Shibuya when one of the young Tokyo journalists who had taken me there, his face drenched with the light of 1,000 media suns, all that towering, animated crawl of commercial information said, you see, it is Blade Runner Town. And it was. It so evidently was. Heck, there was even a role-playing game called Shadowrun, which I really loved the concept of, but I wasn't much of a fan of the mechanics. I'm not a big fan of dice pools. Anyway, Shadowrun also became a video game and spawned some novels. Some really bad novels. Now, I like cyberpunk quite a lot, even if it's not the science fiction genre that I actively look for, but I sure am a big fan of some of the works, especially William Gibson and Neil Stephenson, and can I say Tad Williams? I love many cyberpunk movies. Akira is one of my favorite movies. The Matrix blew me away, and yeah, I even liked Johnny Mnemonic when no one else did. But what about you? Is cyberpunk one of your favorite subgenres of science fiction? Or can you take it or leave it? Let me know down in the comments. Until we meet again, may all the books you read be blessed.